Okay, well, let's do the Square, which is the Palme d'Or winner from Ruben Östlund, who made Force Majeure, which is like a satire on one level, it's a satire on the insularity of the modern art world. It's also a film about the hypocrisy of men, the pervading horror of the bystander society. It is all of these things at the same time. So what happens is a museum puts on an exhibit, which is called the Square, which is an outlined area on the floor in which people must behave responsibly. In the Square, we are all equal and we all have, we all share equal responsibilities. And this is like a kind of artwork statement about the way in which people do or don't interact in society. This, incidentally, in a world in which there are homeless, there is begging, there is poverty on the one hand, on the other hand you have the museum. It's a noble idea for the artwork, but as the PR department say, yeah, it's not very newsworthy. And so sadly, when you're trying to get something's news attention, you're not competing with other museums. You're competing with, acts of terrorism and the actions of extreme right-wing politicians. So they then come up with a fantastically offensive promotional video, which promptly goes viral. Meanwhile, Christian, who is the director of the museum, doesn't notice. He signs off on this without checking it because he's become completely obsessed. He's become weirdly involved in this piece of performance art. Very early on the film, he's out in the street. Somebody shouts, help, 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 help. He intervenes, not realizing that, in fact, he's having his wallet and phone stolen. And he then becomes completely obsessed about the whereabouts of his wallet and his phone, which is still sending a signal telling him that his phone is now in a tower block, which is not that far away. And what the film is then about is the difference between, on the one hand, the avowed ideas of this work of art, something which is sort of meant to, generate positive goodwill, blah, 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 and the fact that Christian presents himself as this paragon of liberal virtue. He's somebody who runs this museum, which is cutting-edge art installations, and he gives very impassioned speeches about changing society and everyone being more egalitarian. Whereas, in fact, in his personal politics, he is rife with all the petty prejudices against which he rails. So he bullies his employees into doing his dirty work in terms of trying to get his phone back. He's accused by a female journalist of using his position of power to score conquest, which is an accusation he rather grudgingly has to confess has some truth. And so the movie is about that schism between those two things. And it's a weird and very sort of sprawling piece. One of the things that happens all the way through the film is that characters cry for help. And pretty much regularly throughout the film, those cries for help are ignored. And it all comes to a head in a set piece which is pictured on the poster. If you've seen the poster, which is this guy stripped to the waist, standing on a table, glowering menacingly at this room full of dinner-jacketed art patrons, which is like a performance art piece which gets out of hand, and again is all to do with that bystander thing about, if somebody's crying for help but you don't want to get involved, should you look away or should you leap in? It's a really strange film. At times it's very funny, at times it's very alarming, at times it's rather broader than it could be. I mean, the gags about modern art basically being piles of rubble that might accidentally get swept up by the cleaner wouldn't have looked out of place in a Not the 9 O'Clock News sketch from the 1970s, 1980s. That's kind of slightly older hat stuff. But it has a brilliant performance by Claes Bang. The central character of Christian is really, really well delineated as somebody who absolutely presents as, forward-looking and progressive, but is in fact full of these sort of petty darknesses. I mean, if you look at Austin's previous film, this is something which he's done before, taking a character who's a kind of middle class liberal, apparently nice on the outside, and then you suddenly start to see a fracture, you suddenly start to see a schism, and that character starts to fall apart. So I liked it. I didn't love it, but I really did like it. I've seen it a couple of times. Second time round, I thought it had more depth. First time round, because it's so tonally changeable and because it's rather sprawling, I thought it was good. Second time round, I thought it was pretty good. There's a certain distance from it because there are times at which its archness just keeps you one removed. But it's really intriguing, and there are things in it which are, there's a quote on the poster which says it's designed to make your jaw drop, and it does. There are moments in it that are jaw dropping.